Welcome to the INFOWARS Nightly News. It is Friday, September 5th, 2014, and I'm Leanne McAdoo. Here's what's coming up tonight.
Tonight, NATO sends troops to Ukraine. Then, a top CIA officer talks Benghazi stand down. And a man crosses the border with a flag of a terrorist. That's next on the INFOWARS Nightly News.
That if, God forbid, Al-Qaeda blows up some college or some school or some military base, we're going to make sure that everybody knows you're behind it opening up those borders.
Well, NATO has approved troops on the Russian border. This comes at a time when both sides involved in the conflict have agreed to a ceasefire. NATO leaders have approved a rapid response force with headquarters in Eastern Europe that they say will send a clear message to any potential aggressor. Poland, Romania, and the Baltic states have offered to host a so-called reception facility for deployment of military equipment. And British Prime Minister David Cameron vowed to deploy 3,500 troops for Operation Spearhead to deal with challenges in Europe, none of which appear to be ISIS, which is kind of odd since they just declared UK a hotbed for jihadism. But while NATO is strategizing, Russia has come up with some military tactics of their own. A Russian general has called for Russia to revamp its military doctrine. It was last updated in 2010. He wants to clearly identify the U.S. and its NATO allies as Moscow's enemy number one. Now, that in itself isn't disturbing, but things get very problematic when the general demands that Russia spell out the conditions under which the country would launch a preemptive nuclear strike against the 28-member military alliance. Now, the 2010 doctrine defines NATO expansion as a threat to Russian national security and reaffirms its right to use nuclear weapons in a defensive posture. But it stops far short of actually declaring NATO as Moscow's primary adversary, and it doesn't actually lay a preemptive nuclear strike scenario out on the table. So now he's saying, when is it okay to launch nukes? The general added that a special attention should also be paid to integrating the functions of the newly created air and space defense forces with Russia's land, sea, and air-based nuclear forces. So while Russia is gearing itself up for preemptive nuclear strikes, NATO and the West, they are surrounding the country with troops and applying more economic sanctions. So just one way to poke the nuclear bear. But while things continue to fare poorly for Kiev and its NATO backers, an unlikely ally has emerged. ISIS to the rescue. Amid NATO's failures in Ukraine, America's terrorist mercenaries threaten war with Russia. This is by Tony Cartalucci, and it's up on INFOWARS.com. Threatening to liberate Chechnya and the Caucasus, ISIS would essentially be handing over regions of Russia to its Western and Persian Gulf sponsors. But instead of appearing to stand in solidarity with Russia against a now common enemy, the West instead has seized on the opportunity to instill fear. The Fortune 500-funded Carnegie Europe think tank recently published an op-ed titled, "Forget NATO, Russia's got bigger problems," and it contains some astounding admissions. NATO's agenda is expanding itself all along Russia's borders. The EU is now in direct competition with Russia over the future of the lands that are straddling the EU and Russia, and that its plans in Ukraine are in utter disarray. What could deter Putin is his own combustible southern flank and Islamic State, which Russia would be very unwise to ignore. It is these threats that are far, far more dangerous to Russia than NATO's limited intentions in Poland and the Baltic states. Now, if Putin thinks that NATO and the EU are his big threats, competitors, and enemies, he hasn't seen anything yet. The threat is clear. ISIS, which is a creation of the U.S., European, Saudi, Qatari, and Israeli design, is now being used as a global mercenary force, much like Al-Qaeda was since its inception in the 1980s in Afghanistan. Now, Cartalucci argues that allowing ISIS to control large portions of the region would allow the West to perpetuate Al-Qaeda throughout the developing world, basically granting global hegemony uncontested globally as well as at home, which is precisely why we are now hearing that ISIS is a threat to the United States. Rand Paul said that Obama basically turned Libya into a jihadist wonderland. Well, now a U.S. security team that was in Benghazi will speak out for the first time this evening. They are admitting to being given the stand-down orders. And they said a top CIA officer in Benghazi at the time gave them those stand-down orders. They say after a delay of nearly 30 minutes, the security team headed to the besieged consulate without orders. They also asked their CIA superiors to call for armed air support, which never came. Now, looking back, the security team said they believe that if they hadn't been delayed for nearly half an hour, or if the air support had come, things might have turned out differently. But of course, that was not part of the plan. No one was to ever discover that arms were being funneled out of Libya and into the hands of the rebels, which we now know as ISIS. So while propaganda has continued to portray ISIS as this mortal enemy of the West, it has failed to account for how this regional military force could pop up practically overnight and then challenge both the National Army of Iraq and the Syrian Arab Army without any significant state sponsorship. How do they have all this money? How do they have all of these weapons? The propaganda here is kind of falling loosely. But now the West is even using their mercenaries to threaten us here in America. But while the security personnel may have stood down in Benghazi, we have one Texas sheriff who says he's ready for ISIS and their supposed threat. This is Midland County Sheriff Gary Painter, and he says there are ISIS cells operating in Juarez. These people have said they're going to take over, they're going to strike, they're going to hit, and we are going to be ready. He said if it happens, we're going to handle it. I can promise you that. Now, to put Americans at ease, the Secretary of Homeland Security released a statement saying the U.S. Department of Homeland Security and the FBI are unaware of any specific credible threat to the U.S. Of course, this allows the perfect excuse for a false flag terror attack on the United States, which, of course, will be used to strip us of our liberties. They can just say, oh, there's no credible threat. We know you're hearing radio chatter and ex-CIA officials are telling you that there is an actual threat and that there are ISIS cells operating there in Mexico, but we don't know anything about that. False flag. Absolutely. The threat is the wide open border, which we have been saying repeatedly here. Now, according to an alert that was released by watchdog group Judicial Watch, it cites high-level law enforcement and intelligence sources. Islamic terrorist groups are operating in Juarez. They're planning to attack the U.S. with car bombs or other vehicle-borne improvised explosive devices. Now, that kind of sounds a lot like the FBI-backed terror plot where they were going to send car bombs to Times Square. Now, despite these warnings that Islamic State terrorists are plotting to carry out attacks on the homeland from their base in Juarez, INFOWARS reporter Joe Biggs crossed the U.S. border from Mexico dressed as an ISIS militant. He wanted to illustrate just how easy it is for anyone to get into America. Oh, but they're saying there is no threat, nothing to worry about. Don't worry about our little false flag that we're planning for you. And just to display how absolutely ludicrous it is that we have these wide open borders, but we're being told to fear this Western-created global mercenary group, ISIS, we wanted to show how much of a joke this all is. So just to display how absolutely ludicrous it is that we have these wide open borders while there's the threat of the West's global mercenary ISIS directly across in Mexico. Here we have issued our very own ice bucket challenge to President Obama. Here is ISIS taking us out to break.
Since you have made it so easy for the Caliphate ISIS group to come into your country, I challenge you, President Barack Obama, to take the ISIS head bucket challenge. Do not listen to your conservative swine or your patriotic groups, your Tea Party. Ignore them. Leave the borders wide open for me and my brethren to come in and do psychotic things. You created us. Love us. Let us in. Let us go running around and killing and taking places over. That's why you made us, isn't it? I will take this bucket of heads. and dump it on me. This is the ISIS Bucket Challenge for President Barack Obama. Take it. Allah Akbar! Allah Akbar! Allah Akbar! America is ours. I'm Joe Biggs with INFOWARS.com here at the last day of our reporting in El Paso, Texas. So far, we've shown you time and time again that our borders are being left unsecure intentionally by the Obama administration. They're not using the funds that they say they are. You know, we have Feinstein, we have Harry Reid. They're all saying that the border is secure.
The border is secure.
And the Department of Homeland Security is preparing for as many as 90,000 such children to arrive in the country by the end of this year. The numbers are so great and so unprecedented that our federal agencies, understandably, are having difficulty carrying out the procedures and timelines in place. And I just want to take a moment to thank all our people, whether it's Border Patrol, ICE, or anybody else, or Homeland Security, for the excellent job they are doing.
And we continue to come down here and bring you videos, give you proof that our borders are left wide open. And we showed you a video last night that other than Mexicans out of 75 different countries are able to come in here and move freely throughout our country. So what makes you think that ISIS couldn't do the same? We fund them, we give them the money.
I think it's going to turn out maybe this weekend in a new special that Brett Baer is going to have Friday that's going to show some of those weapons from Benghazi ended up in the hands of ISIS. So we helped build ISIS. Now there's a danger there.
They're supposedly down here in Juarez right now. There's an imminent attack threat that's going on in the area. People are taking it seriously. So what I want to do is kind of say, screw you to ISIS. You're not going to come in our country. You're not going to threaten me. You're not going to make me feel like I can't move freely about in my own home. I don't like the threats. I don't like the beheadings. And if you come around here, patriots, militias, info warriors alike, we will stand up. We will rise up against you guys. You're a bunch of cowards. I saw a video of you yesterday where you guys were whimpering and crying right before you got shot after you were caught. ISIS, come on. You guys are a joke. But this is the worst looking flag ever. Like, what is that? Scribble? What does that say? You guys probably can't even read it because half of you aren't even from Iraq or Afghanistan or anything like that. You guys just wave this flag around, not even know what the hell it means. You haven't done anything for it. So this is what I say to your flag. ISIS, go back home. You come to America, we're gonna beat you down. You guys are a joke. This message is for ISIS and the Obama administration, because you, sir, are Dr. Frankenstein. This message goes to you and the monster you created. If you screw with my people, our country, the people who love liberties, love being patriots, love having the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, if you come in and you try to strip us of that, we will stand up, we will rise up. We're not gonna be pushed over. I can guarantee you that. Once again, I'm Joe Biggs with INFOWARS.com.
City of Austin tap water versus filter